The biggest food empires rarely collapse because people stopped eating. They collapsed because someone decided honesty cost too much. A jar of baby juice with no fruit in it. A chicken chain that borrowed itself into bankruptcy. One empire hit a fortune ranking among Europe's biggest collapses. Part of it framed, hanging on someone else's wall. Positive tests, shipped anyway. The lab results said salmonella. The shipping orders said ship it anyway. By the winter of 2008, a peanut processing plant in Blakely, Georgia, run by Stuart Parnell, was already sending contaminated peanut paste to Kellogg and dozens of other food makers. Parnell had built the Peanut Corporation of America into a supplier trusted by companies that never inspected the plant themselves. So when early tests came back positive for salmonella, employees simply retested the same batch until a clean result appeared, and the paste went out stamped with the old, cleaner result. The retest that might have stopped the outbreak would have cost less than a candy bar. Instead, tainted peanut butter reached school lunches, nursing homes, and kitchen shelves in 46 states, sickening more than 700 people and killing 9. Investigators traced every case back to the same Georgia plant, and prosecutors did something no one had managed before. They charged a food company executive with federal felonies for knowingly shipping what he knew was dangerous. In 2015, Stuart Parnell was sentenced to 28 years, the harshest punishment any producer had received for a foodborne illness case, and the law around corporate food safety has treated executives differently ever since. The donuts that cooked books. Every quarter, Wall Street expected Krispy Kreme's earnings to beat its own forecast by exactly 1 cent. By early 2003, in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Chief Executive Scott Livingood's team had found a way to make sure it always did. When a franchise deal threatened to miss the mark, the company arranged payments to a franchisee with an understanding that some of that money would flow back onto Krispy Kreme's own books as reported income. So the numbers matched the promise, and investors kept buying a stock that seemed impossibly consistent. That consistency was the entire pitch, a donut chain that never disappointed quarter after quarter. Regulators started asking questions in 2004 after the company quietly lowered its own earnings outlook and the stock lost more than half its value in a single year. The Securities and Exchange Commission spent 5 years untangling the round-trip transactions before settling with 3 former executives in early 2009. Livingood agreed to pay back roughly $540,000 in gains and penalties, about $800,000 after adjusting for inflation, without admitting or denying the SEC's findings. The company that had sold investors a story about a business too simple to fail had spent 2 years making sure the numbers, not the donuts, were the ones getting the sugar coating. Sugar water called apple juice. New parents reach for the label without a second thought. 100% fruit juice, nothing else added. The jars actually held flavored sugar water, and Beechnut's own research director had already warned executives the new concentrate wasn't real juice. By the late 1970s, Beechnut Nutrition Corporation, based in upstate New York, was the country's second largest baby food maker, and switching to a cheaper apple concentrate supplier saved about $0.0025 on every gallon. That saving mattered to a company under financial pressure, so the warnings got buried, the contracts got renewed, and fake apple juice for babies kept shipping to 20 states and 5 countries for nearly a decade. Vice President of Operations John Lavery kept approving the purchases for years after his own scientists raised doubts. Investigators eventually built a case, and Beechnut pleaded guilty to more than 200 counts in 1987, paying a fine of $2 million, a sum that would run close to $5 million now. Lavery was convicted on mail fraud and conspiracy charges and sentenced to a year and a day. An appeals court later threw out related counts on a technicality, but his fraud conviction stood. A company built on trust with new parents had sold infants a product with no fruit in it, and it never fully recovered the reputation it built one jar at a time. Bananas and the Death Squad. It was one of the most recognizable fruit brands on the planet, and for 7 years its Colombian subsidiary was also paying a right-wing paramilitary group blamed for massacres and forced disappearances. From 1997 to 2004, Chiquita Brands' international subsidiary Banadex sent cash to the AUC, a group the United States government had officially designated a terrorist organization, after AUC leaders threatened Banadex employees and property if the payments stopped. The company's executives kept authorizing the payments even after federal prosecutors warned them directly in 2003 that the transactions violated anti-terrorism law. Chiquita disclosed the payments to the Justice Department voluntarily that that year, but continued making them for months afterward while lawyers worked out how to stop. Chief Executive Fernando Aguirre, who joined the company after the payments began, signed the guilty plea in March of 2007, admitting to a single count of engaging in transactions with a specially designated terrorist group. Chiquita paid a fine of $25 million, equal to roughly $37 million at current prices, in 5 annual installments, and agreed to build a corporate compliance program from scratch. Few public companies had ever pleaded guilty to funding a terrorist organization before, and the case became a reference point for prosecuting corporations, not just individuals, for financing violence abroad. The milk empire's missing billions. In 1961, Callisto Tanzi took over his father's small grocery business in Collecchio, Italy, and spent the next 4 decades turning it into Parmalat, a dairy conglomerate operating in 34 countries. Tanzi kept the company looking profitable by routing money through more than 200 subsidiaries, including several in offshore tax havens, so that debt stayed hidden while the balance sheet showed cash that did not exist, and each year the gap only grew larger. The whole structure depended on one fiction holding, a Cayman Islands unit that supposedly held nearly 4 billion euros in a Bank of America account. In December of 2003, Bank of America told Parmalat's own auditors that account did not exist, and the company collapsed into bankruptcy within days. Investigators later found Tanzi had personally diverted about 500 million euros toward his family's struggling tourism business, and when they searched further, they found paintings by Picasso, Monet, and Van Gogh, quietly stored in friends' homes to keep them from creditors. The final hole in Parmalat's accounts reached 14 billion euros, roughly $30 billion by today's measure, making it one of the largest corporate collapses in European history. Tanzi was convicted of market rigging and fraudulent bankruptcy in 2008, and to the end, he kept insisting the company's finances had simply been distorted, not faked. The ice cream cover-up. The Brenham Creamery Company had made dairy products in Brenham, Texas since 1907, and as Bluebell Creameries, its ice cream became the dessert that tasted like home for generations of American families. By 2010, company president Paul Cruz knew the plants had unsanitary conditions that could let listeria grow. So instead of ordering repairs, he told the company to stop testing for it, letting contamination spread for years without anyone officially finding it. When outside health officials caught contaminated products in early 2015, Cruz's response was not a public recall. Delivery drivers quietly pulled products from store freezers and cafeterias, telling customers there were manufacturing problems, not listeria. A full recall did not come until officials forced the issue, months after the first illnesses were reported. 3 people died and 10 were sickened before the company acted. Bluebell pleaded guilty in 2020 to 2 misdemeanor counts, and a judge set the criminal penalty at $17,250,000, a figure that would land near $21 million now. Cruz faced felony fraud charges carrying decades in prison, but after a trial ended in a hung jury, he pleaded guilty in 2023 to a single misdemeanor and paid a $100,000 fine. He never spent a day in jail for a decision that started with a repair bill he didn't want to pay. The empire built on loans. Scott Beck had already turned a video rental franchise into a personal fortune when he looked at a small rotisserie chicken restaurant and saw the same trick twice. By 1995, Beck and his partner had rebranded the chain as Boston Market and pushed past 1,000 locations across the country. But the growth ran on an unusual engine. Instead of franchisees raising their own money, the company loaned them tens of millions of dollars to open new stores as fast as possible. Every new location made the chain look bigger and the stock look stronger. So Wall Street rewarded the shares, and the company raised even more money to lend out again, which meant every franchisee now owed debt payments that only worked if sales kept climbing. Sales stopped climbing in 1997. Stock that had traded above $40 a share fell to a few dollars within 16 months, and Beck resigned in May of 1998. A trustee later investigating the collapse alleged in court filings that Beck and his partner had cashed out million-dollar payments from a related company months before the bankruptcy, even as the stock they had sold to the public was worth nothing. The company filed for Chapter 11 that October, closed hundreds of restaurants, and losses had already passed $400 million, well over $800 million once converted to today's money. Milk powder, melamine, and silence. In 2008, in Shijiazhuang, China, Sanlu Group's general manager Tian Wenhua ran one of the country's most trusted dairy brands, built on decades of state awards and a reputation for quality. To cut costs, middlemen who supplied Sanlu had been watering down raw milk and then adding melamine, an industrial chemical, because its high nitrogen content could fool the standard tests used to measure protein, so watered-down milk could still pass as full strength on paper. Sanlu's own quality control had received complaints about sick infants as early as May of that year, but the company did not report the problem to authorities until early August, weeks before the Beijing Olympics began, and it kept selling contaminated infant formula throughout that gap. Nearly 300,000 children became ill, most with kidney stones, and at least 6 infants died. When the scandal finally became public that September, Sanlu Group was bankrupt within months. A court in Shijiazhuang sentenced Tian Wenhua to life in prison after she pleaded guilty to producing and selling substandard products, while 2 of the men who supplied the melamine received death sentences for endangering public safety. A dairy company that had spent decades building trust with mothers had spent one summer deciding that trust was worth less than the cost of real milk. Which of these collapses surprised you most? Tell us in the comments and subscribe for more stories of empires that fell apart from the inside.